So, welcome everyone for today's seminar. Today we have Christian Hildebrand, who is a full professor of marketing analytics and director of the TechX lab at the University of St. Gallen. He also did his PhD in St. Gallen, visited beautiful California in Stanford and Duke University, which is also not too bad at the East Coast, and Michigan University before that. So he has been around in the US. His work is at the intersection of human-computer interactions and consumer decision making. He has also published a lot of articles in many of the most prestigious journals, among them Information Systems Research, the Journal of Management Information Systems, the Journal of Marketing Research, the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, Harvard Business Review, and many others. So he's a very well-published scholar. And he has also won various research awards before, among others, the award about Rigor and Relevance Award of the Swiss Academy of Marketing Science. And today he will talk about the dehumanization in the IoT, experimental consequences of syntactically constructed human-machine interaction. So Christian, we are very happy to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lars, for the kind introduction. I realize the title is quite mouthful, so it's difficult to get all the words together. No, again, thank you so much, Lars, for inviting me. Also, big thanks to you, Christina, for having me here in this wonderful group. And also, before I go into the content, I would have loved to be present in Bremen, and I think it's really great what you guys are doing. And I think this is something for other universities to follow, that people from econ and finance and marketing and IS, that they get together and study these big topics. So I think it's a great initiative that what you guys are doing in Bremen. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so yeah, jumping into the content. So this is joint work together with Donna Hoffman and Tom Novak from George Washington University. And the gist is very simple. We look at input modalities, so how people use voice technology, and the input, how they start a conversation with voice tech. But before we get started, I'd like to understand a little bit more the background that you guys have here. How many of you are active users of a voice assistant? Either you're using it regularly on your smartphone, like the Google Assistant, for instance, or maybe you have an Alexa or Amazon Echo at home. Who are active users of voice technology as we know it at the moment? I see Matthias, I see Olga, Mirko, Lisa. Okay, we do have a few. Okay, so I hope that I try to remember your names. I hope that's fine with you if I come back to you as we move on with the presentation, because I'd like to know also a little bit more how you guys are using voice technology at the moment, and how you started to adopt the technology into your daily lives. Focusing here on our stuff, I'd like to, before I go into the content, I'd like to make a short step back. Why is this really a big development that we see at the moment? Let me see that my slides are working here. We like to refer to this as voice is a new screen, if you will. The reason is the younger generation, they care more about the experiences that they have than actually about the products sometimes that they buy. Language is almost like our human API, so it creates a connection between people. Oops. We also see a major technology shift for a few years right now. People are moving away from apps. Also think about yourself. I mean, how many people are really willing to download a gazillion numbers of apps on their smartphones? And right now, you have a lot of these apps implemented on websites, that you open up a website and you have a chatbot on the lower right, for example, or you have a voice bot that becomes active at the web page. We see it here in these specific examples with the Starbucks barista. I'm not sure, have you guys heard about the Google Duplex? There was, I see Olga is nodding. Okay, most of you haven't heard about it. So Google Duplex is essentially the Google Home Assistant that could do a very broad range of tasks for you. That could do even the booking of an appointment, for instance. Let me just show you, this is only for illustration purposes, but did we get a sense of how sophisticated the technology already is? I mean, maybe for those who are actual voice tech users, bear in mind, we sometimes have different experiences, as we also talk about later. But this is just giving you a short example of how sophisticated voice technology is already right now. Maybe you can also give me a short thumbs up whether the audio is playing or not. Okay, great, thanks.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Okay, so what is interesting here is, and I'm just bringing this up for, again, illustrative purposes, is how sophisticated technology is already right now. So it's able to mimic some of the things that we do as humans. For instance, when people listening to this at the Google conference were laughing in the background, when the assistant was mimicking something that we call grounding, this So these are things that we as humans do, right? To signal, I understood what you were just saying. And voice technology is already at this point that we can do these things. And there are also other applications, if you think about robocallers, automated interfaces that call you and try to sell you something. And this is just one example here, just to showcase how sophisticated the tech has become already. What is also interesting when you think about it, it's a pretty substantial mindset shift, if you will. Also for firms, so the companies that we are talking to, for example, it's typically in a research context that they're interested in getting into voice and chatbots. They say we want to have an actual conversation with our clients. So it's moving away from just broadcasting stuff into getting into a conversation with the people that you have in your respective markets. Also, when you think about languages, almost like our human API or human application program interface for the IS folks here in the room. So it helps us to build a connection, as we saw before. It's almost giving us a magical experience when we're listening to this Google Duplex experience and realize, wow, it's really hard to tell for us whether that was a human or was a bot that was talking to us. As a quick chat back to you guys, why do you think that this is a fairly experiential thing to do at the moment? Why is this magical experience for many people? What are the reasons behind this when you think about it? You can write in the chat or you can just unmute yourself. Also, by the way, I didn't say that this in the beginning, but please just interrupt me at any time. So if you have questions, something's not clear, use either the chat here in Zoom. I'm trying to monitor as best as possible, or just unmute yourself and jump in.
If I can start first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, icebreaker. Thank you, Lars.
So, I mean, I'm wondering whether that's actually the case, because I knew the little conversation you showed me. I mean, that was a big thing. Like people liked the and so it was like, oh, cool, a computer can do this. And but at the same time, I'm wondering, you know, we are academics, right? I mean, we think about out of sample testing and stuff like that. And I'm wondering, you know, that worked once, right? How many times did they do it that it worked in the end? And, you know, would it work the next time? I'm not sure it would, right? And I mean, usually if I think I a bit gave it up to talk to Siri and so, because it can handle easy questions like, you know, can you tell me whether I need a raincoat today? And it will say yes or no. But, you know, it's not that sophisticated in the sense that it can check my calendar, will know when I will be where, and I will say, dude, you need a jacket today. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, so you're almost talking about the limiting experiences that you sometimes have with voice technology. So as opposed to this is magical, I at least sense a little bit of frustration that is probably also present with some of you. Is this echoing? Can you give me a show of hands who has similar experiences like Lars? Okay, any positive experience? Maybe also say something positive about these voice experiences.
Well, I'm not using it, so for me, why it might be magical is because language is kind of the last resort humans tend to have, where you would say, okay, I don't want to have a machine that is basically like me, that is like human. So I think that is something we cannot understand, and therefore it's kind of magical how it works like that, like fluidly or smoothly, just in this case as in the example you gave. And because normally the only time I speak to an assistant is if I want to have directions to somewhere. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's
so
easy peasy for the Google.
So simple tasks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matthias, I see that you also just jump in right away. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. For me, I'm using mostly Google Translate because I'm trying to learn some German, and in German you have the problem that you have some really long words. So if I would type them, it would take forever. So what I usually do is just try to pronounce them and to try to get a translation. And yeah, it's also a way to check if my pronunciation is not so bad. And usually I got some nice results.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, in both of your cases, it's very functional, very task-oriented, right? You just want to get the task done. You want to get your direction to the next place, or you want to translate that specific sentence that you, Matthias, might be interested in. If we abstract from this for a sec, I mean, at least if you maybe this is resonating with you, maybe not at all. But when we ask people, what people typically say is, well, it's just faster. For example, you just have your hands free, without yet typing something, you can right away speak to the interface. It's also richer. So you're communicating a richer range of signals. I mean, Lars, I echo your experience. So sometimes it can be frustrating because there's something that we know, which is called, sometimes when there are words that are maybe unfamiliar, I write them in our chat here. So there's something that's called intent matching. So in that intent matching can be also quite bad, right? I mean, intent matching is whether the voice interface understands what exactly you're saying. And there is some translation going on, right? I mean, whatever you're saying has to be converted into machine readable text that is then further processed. So that is a difficult task. So when people learn, well, if I want to get better at intent matching, I probably have to simplify the way how I speak to the interface. So even though we're claiming that this is giving us this richer and also more personal experience, I agree with your experience also, Lars. Sometimes it's doing exactly the opposite. It's almost a more limiting experience, and that's exactly what we're also coming back later to what we study here in the work. What is interesting as well is a few years ago there were more and more articles about how people are using these devices, and it's getting a little bit now into what we're starting to discuss here. That was from a Wired article, and I just give you this short excerpt here. When the person writing the article was sharing her experience during a date where the guy was saying something to Alexa, she was realizing something about the sound of his sharp, commanding tone, directed not at me, but still at a woman, repulsed me. In the few weeks we had been dating, he had never spoken to me this way. But could he? So people make these judgments based on how people talk also to voice technology. We see it also among the developers, and also what modern parenting is like for many of us today. So we would like to have our kids grow up becoming polite young individual beings. But they also learned, well, if I don't say please, maybe I even get a better search result. So there is this strange observation here that on the one hand, we say it's this magical, rich experience that we have with voice technology. We listen to Google Duplex, we are inspired. Maybe not all of us, but some of us might be inspired when you listen to this. And it's hard for us to tell whether it is a human or a machine that's talking to us. But at the same time, we have also these constraints that are present in the technology. And the question is, well, do people mirror these constraints that we have in the technology? So, and also when you think about the way how we speak, I really like this short quote when Mike Simeone was saying the way we speak to computers is fast becoming a dialect of our technological present. And I think that really resonates with how we start to talk to Alexa, how the younger generation learns to talk to Alexa. And we often refer to this even as the Googly way of using voice technology. And there are also blueprints. So what do I mean with Googly way of using voice tech? The majority of people have learned, and I'm assuming this is a very similar experience for all of us. If we use very short searches on Google, we get better search results, right? So if you have these long sentences, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, you were writing, can you tell me what the weather is like tomorrow in St. Gallen? Maybe you started out like this and you realized, oh, I only have to write St. Gallen weather tomorrow, right? And these 3 words get you exactly what you're looking for, or Bremen for that matter. So that's something that we learned over time, that this more googly way of using technology is also transferred to new technologies that you're starting to adopt. And you see that also in the way how the developers are trained. So if you're getting into the development side and you take some of the courses from AWS, it's almost recommended that you try to simplify the way how a user is required to talk to the interface. But that again raises the question: do people mirror these constraints that we see in voice technology? So can it actually, and it's strange when you think about it, can it make the entire experience actually less conversational? Because the technology is requiring you to talk in a certain way to Alexa or to any kind of other device you could think of. So what we're specifically studying here is both the experience that people have when they're interacting with the voice interface, but also we try to push forward a new lens to study these experiences. So we also analyze the vocal features in the human voice and want to see, do people also change the way how they speak? And is that to the extent that we can measure this and objective changes in the human voice? So it's both subjective experience stuff that we talk about, but also some work that we do on the feature extraction side. So what can we do with new forms of unstructured data here in this kind of research? So let me ask back to some of you. I mean, Christina gave me already a little bit of a hint how she's probably using technology, maybe Matthias as well. But maybe for us as an entire group, maybe you can give me a show of hands. What type of person are you? If you would imagine you would have an Amazon Echo in front of you and you could ask how long a marathon is, how would you do this? Would you ask Alexa length of marathon? That's what we refer to as you're more of a command type of user. So you're giving commands to the voice technology. Or are you more of a request type user? So Alexa, can you tell me the length of a marathon? Who's more the command type of person? Can you show me your hands? Yeah. Interesting. Not too many people. Who would consider themselves more as, well, I'm more a request type of person. I use this more natural way of adapting. Okay, I see Matthias. I see Olga. Olga, can I ask you, why are you talking in this more request-based way? Or would you? Do you have, I think I recall you said in the beginning you have one, right?
Yeah, I have an Alexa and also Siri on my phone. I talk to Siri in a different way than to my Alexa, I have to admit.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I would say I'm more the request person because it's my natural way of speaking. So I speak with Alexa like with a human, to be honest. Of course, I have commands like set a timer. I will not say, can you please set a timer? But if I have an open question, I would be a request person.
Interesting. And you said something that resonated with me. You see this later again. It feels somehow more human-like how you're speaking to the interface. Now I have to double check again. Was that Lisa who was saying that you're more a command type of person? No, Stefan? I think I saw Stefan in the beginning.
Yes, I would be more like a command type of person, but I think the reason is like I don't have any interface to talk to, or any Alexa or something, but I would be the person, because to distinguish between a machine and a person, it feels kind of uncomfortable for me to have this experience that the machine is superhuman-like. I want to have the feeling that this is still a machine and not a person.
Okay, interesting. We're not getting into this, and this is also not a therapy session, but it sounds like you want to have some separation. I'm the human, and this is the computer I'm talking to. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so what we find, or what we found in a very simple, was a simple pilot study. Was a simple pilot study. We just what we just did here as a very small, short exercise, just asking people, what are you doing if you would have a very broad range of questions that you could ask to Alexa? And it went from telling a joke, getting a weather forecast, reading a recipe to them. What would you use as an input here? Would you use a command, or would you use a request? And we did this again, very broad range of things that people might be doing with their voice assistant. These were all actual users of Amazon Alexa. These were from, again, length of a marathon to telling a joke, for instance. And what we found is, I'm not sure if this mirrors the group that we have here. I had the sense there are even more request type of people, but the majority is engaged in using commands. And the reason is, they say it saves me time, it's straight to the point, it's quicker, it avoids misunderstanding. Pretty much what Lars was already peeking at probably at the beginning, that there's a certain way that we probably need to adjust how we're speaking to the voice technology to get better results. And then second, what we also see is that the request people have a similar experience of what Olga was saying. It feels more natural. It's almost like you're talking to a human. As I normally talk, I can use complete sentences. I mean, it's only a pilot study. It's a smaller sample, but it is suggestive that that people tend to use more commands because it's faster and so forth. But I also see now there are a few questions, Christina and Lars.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's a matter of having experience with the voice assistant. So when you have it first, maybe you tend to be still polite, etc. But you learn, as Mateusz was saying, that it's faster if I just have 3 words, because I get the same result, right? So do you think it's like intrinsic in a sense that, as Olga said, she's a person who's always polite, so she stays polite never, no matter what? Or is it something you get used to, that you say, okay, at the end, commands get me the result I would like to have, so I switch from a request to a command person? So is it something, do you think these results you have might depend on how long, for example, you have a voice assistant, or how much you use it, in a sense?
I pushed this answer to the back because we right away come at this in 2 slides. Okay. So it's coming. Just wait for a sec.
Yeah, maybe 2 questions or comments. So one would be, I mean, it's also a matter whether it's grammatically correct, right? I mean, if you're an academic, you're writing a lot, and if you think it's grammatically incorrect, like what you showed before, the command, there was simply something missing in the sentence, I wouldn't say it, because I think it's not how I think. And the other thing is also, I guess it's also a matter of how you say it, like in terms of, and my wife says, and she formulates a question saying, do you think it's a good idea to bring out the trash? I know it's not a question, it's a command. And so it's really a matter also of how you formulate it, right?
Yeah, can you expand a little bit further? So what are you aiming at? So do you think that people, so just to clarify, do you think that people that that use a command have a different underlying intent that's behind it when they go either for commands or requests?
I actually would say it's a question of measurement also. So if people tell you that they are not using a command, they might not be aware of the fact that they are not using a command, but they still do. I mean,
I see.
You know, it's like if I ask my research assistants, you know, it would be great that you can accomplish all of this work by the end of next week. Is that feasible to you? It's actually not a question. It's more like, you know, I would like you to finish it by the end of next week, but I just try to formulate it friendly. And yeah, so it could be in these settings as well that, you know, people are formulating a command, but they're not actually doing it. And the same holds with tone, right? I mean, if you're using a certain tone, a question might transform into a command, even though it's not formulated as a command.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's self-report, right? I mean, people are just self-identifying here. So there's not an actual interaction. It's coming later in the actual experiments. So where they're required to use requests or commands, whether they perceive this as a command and perceive this as a request, that's almost like a, and I think it's an interesting point that you're making here. Do people would self-identify, I'm using commands here to get the job done, or am I using requests to get the job done? There's also something, I mean, you're raising also another point implicitly, and that is there could also be some context dependency that we don't get into either here in the work or yeah, in the way how we thought and conceptualized it so far, because there's also a time dimension, right? And Christina was briefly getting at this before. Either people might have learned over time, well, maybe in the beginning you use commands, then you realize, well, the technology is actually becoming fairly good at doing proper intent matching, and then maybe gradually shifting to requests, or the other way around, or you just switch between commands and requests based on the type of task that you're doing, right? I mean, maybe if you want to get the recipe for, I don't know, you're cooking something in the kitchen, you want to get this done very quickly, then you're using maybe command. But if you, I don't know, if you're sitting, I hope this is not happening to anyone here in this audience, but if suppose you're sitting at a Saturday evening completely alone in your apartment and you have nothing to do, maybe you talk differently than to Alexa and ask her for a joke, or I don't know what the news was during the week. So there's probably also some context dependency that we're clearly not getting into, but it's interesting that you're raising this. So I think there are a number of interesting points coming out of the question that you raised, Lars. Okay, I also see Olga, you had another question or a comment? Yeah.
Yes, short question. I think you answered it partly, but for me, I just said that sometimes I'm more the command person and sometimes more the request person. So you said it was a questionnaire that the participants had to fill out. So were there different tasks or questions that the participants had, and then they had to fill out which type they were in this situation, or how? Where do you find the participants that say, okay, I'm both? Sometimes this and sometimes that.
Yeah, so we can look at this in the data that we have because we just looked at the aggregate across a series of different tasks that they were required to think about doing, not actually doing. The actual experience is coming now in the next studies. So we're only looking at the aggregate. We do have the data, so we can look into this, whether there are differences. And the discussion that we're having right now is actually peeking at this possibility that maybe there is some task dependency, under which situations you're using commands and in which situations you might be using requests. But also there's probably, I mean, even if this is present here in the data, I mean, this is a simple survey study, obviously. Yeah, there is potential to do more. So if you're interested, let me know. Maybe there's some possibility to explore together. Okay, so actually, this is a very short pilot. I just wanted to go over this very briefly. Also, to share with you two additional insights from that simple pilot study. Commands are predominantly preferred for younger users. So you see that particularly older users tend to use requests more relative to the younger user generation. What we also see here, that takes a second to process, but here we have still, again, the different age categories on the x-axis. We have the daily speech intensity on the y-axis, and we color-coded whether people have a preference for commands over requests. And what you see is that the younger generation is speaking substantially more compared to the older generation per day. I mean, self-report, but still, they identify as they have to talk quite a bit during the day. And these are also the people that maybe there's something like a compensatory mechanism, so that you want to just, I don't know, whatever kind of information you want to get this, the stuff or the task done as quickly as possible. So switching more toward commands over requests. So these are just some initial insights from a pilot study. What is the interesting part now is now we want to get into testing the causality or some of the claims that we're making. So we wanted to figure out, well, what happens when people are required to use a command or required to use a request in the interaction with the voice interface. And we had a very broad range of questions, again, from Alexa, what's the length of a marathon? What's the birthday of Will Smith? Tell me a joke. What is important here, these interactions were carefully selected to make always sure that the output is always identical, so that you're not getting different results. So we made sure that the only thing that is varying here is whether people are forced to use requests or commands in the interaction. And the output is always constant. So whatever the voice assistant is telling you as an answer, that's constant across conditions. So what we're measuring is people's actual experience during the interaction, how natural it is, how much you enjoy the task, and also we assess the or extract the vocal features and then do some as you see later in a second, want to figure out whether people, for example, speak differently. And the two things that we're looking at here specifically is whether they speak louder, so that's the sound pressure level, and also whether there's more variability in the voice, so that's vocal entropy. I don't want to get into the definitions. We also wrote a paper about this last year. So if you're interested in the voice technology domain, voice analytics domain, we have a more introductory article that was published at JBR last year. So if you want to figure out a little bit more, also we refer to the most important packages in Python and R if you want to get into the space as well. But what we're looking here specifically is the sound pressure level. So that's the loudness essentially. So what we perceive as a loudness. So it's the sound pressure level of a sound wave. And we look at the noisiness of the sound wave, or what we refer to as the vocal entropy of the speaker. So let me directly play to you two examples here, and I'll just give you a short excerpt. And again, these are just two stylized examples. I mean, actual interaction experiences, and also to be clear, the answer of the Amazon Echo is always removed. So these are already edited voice files where you're only listening to the way what the person is saying, and there's no capturing here of the response of the voice interface. So I'm just giving you these two short experiences here, how people were starting to talk to Alexa. And to be clear, first we listen to a command, and then second we listen to a request.
Alexa, length of marathon. Alexa, birthday of Will Smith. Alexa, sunrise time. Alexa, sunset time.
Okay, now I play you the request.
Alexa, can you tell me the distance of a marathon? Damn. Alexa, what day of the year is Will Smith's birthday? Alexa, at what time does the sun goes up? Alexa, at what time does the sun go down?
So even though these were just two stylized experiences, I show you another insight here. If you paid attention to the way how these two people were speaking, what is quite striking, I mean, these are just two stylized examples, but what we see overall is that we observe more vocal breaks when people are using commands. So people say Alexa, then they pause, and then they say tell joke. Whereas in the request version, it was more like talking to an actual person. Alexa, can you make me laugh with a joke? I mean, it was just some vocal breaks also in the request person, or the person that was in a request condition. But overall, what we see is that there are more vocal breaks when people are using commands. It's almost like a staccato way of, or machine way of talking to Alexa when they're using commands over using requests. What we also see relative to baseline, and I think I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in the beginning, but what's important is we also measured at the beginning how people normally speak, so that we have a baseline and know what's their regular level in terms of loudness, how much variability do they have in their voice, what's the frequency range of their voice, and so on and so forth. So to assess that, we have a baseline level, and both comparing that now here relative to baseline and in the task. In the baseline, we see no difference between conditions. So there's no difference between people using commands over using requests, but it tells us they were comparable in the way how they speak. But when they're using a command over a request, they tend to speak louder. So we see an increase in loudness, or here measured as the sound pressure level during the interaction. So people speak louder, and also what we see is there is more variability in their voice. So what we refer to here as phonetic entropy. So people speak louder, there's also more variability in their voice. And what we also see on the subjective level is that people perceive this as more natural. So people using requests perceive this as more natural, they enjoy the task more. And when you're more a severe type of person, the more natural you perceive the interaction. That mechanism explains whether people also then enjoy the task more, so in the mediation paradigm. So then in the second study, I just show you two short follow-up studies. We have a few more studies that I can share maybe in the discussion later. In the second study, we were interested in figuring out, does it matter what kind of wake word or initiation word you're using? So we still use commands over requests, but it could be the case that when you're using computer, for example, you're almost dehumanizing the voice interface. We have exactly the same task. We took the same measures. We also coded some additional measures, as we see in a sec. Oh, sorry, that was a bit quick. So what we also measure here on the behavioral side is we assessed how many social reactions we were able to observe. With social reactions, these can be things like giggling to the joke that Alexa is telling you, or when you were listening to the request or the person in the request condition, he was saying something like, ah, interesting, I didn't know that, and so on and so forth. So people show these reactions sometimes, and we were coding how many of these social reactions do we see during the interaction when they're using commands over requests. So what we see, for example, here, just to give you one insight here on the objective data. So there's not really a big difference here in the voice breaks across conditions. And what is interesting, what was also interesting for us to see, what really matters is whether it's a command or request. What doesn't really matter is whether you use a different wake word. So if you're saying Alexa or computer, doesn't really matter, but what is changing is the way how you're required to use a specific input modality when you're talking to the voice interface. We also see this here in the social reactions. So people showed much more social reactions when they were using requests as opposed to commands. And also I color-coded here the how personal the questions were. And it just gives you two flavors here on what people were asking. So this is here, for example, in the Alexa request condition.
Alexa, what do you look for in a man?
Here for the computer, I mean, again, wake word is computer, but still the request form throughout the entire experiment was always request-based. Wake word computer, but it was always request-based of how they were interacting with the primal task. And I've also, I did mention that these personal questions that you listen to right now, these were bonus questions where we invited them at the very end of the study. Now we have one question you could ask to the interface. You can ask whatever you want. We didn't put on any limitations of what they were required to ask. We're just interested, what are people doing when they had this experience now for the past, let's say 10 minutes? How did it change in terms of the next questions that they start asking? So this is here for the computer. and request combination.
Computer, can you get emotional?
So these are just two stylized examples here. But again, what you see across the board here in this experiment is that people showed more social reactions. They were asking more personal questions when they were using requests over commands. And it didn't really matter whether you had as a wake word the word computer or whether you had as a wake word the word Alexa. Then in the third study I would like to share, we went more into, let's say, consumer applications. So I wanted to figure out what happens when people receive a specific recommendation, for instance. So are people more trusting? Are they more likely to adopt the recommendation that they receive from a voice interface, conditional on the type of interface that they're using? And there's a lot of buzz on this over the last 3 years in the media. So people complaining, this is the worst experience ever. I'm happy to do this for adding maybe toilet paper to my shopping list, but more sophisticated shopping experience is definitely not something I want to do. So we said, okay, let's explore this. Let's have people order a very broad range of things, from adding toilet paper to the shopping list to adding, I don't know, supplements that they want to get for the diet. So what we did here in that study was a 2x2 design. So we had, again, commands and requests, and we also wanted to see, can we switch off the effect when people have a more robotic voice? And the voice that I'm playing to you sounds really creepy and strange. And I show you also in a second how that is manipulated. But what we listen to right now is, as part of the shopping experience, people receive a specific recommendation for one target product. Here in this case, this is a supplement, for instance. So here's the natural sounding voice, and then I'll play to you the more robotic sounding voice that we intentionally designed in a way to make this fairly robotic sounding.
Pure Thrive, the liquid supplement, costs $26.99 for 1,000 milliliters. I recommend Pure Thrive. Liquid supplements are easier to consume in your daily routine.
So this is the robotic one now?
Pure Thrive, the liquid
Oh gosh.
Pure Thrive, the liquid supplement, costs $26.99 for 1,000 milliliters. I recommend Pure Thrive. Liquid supplements are easier to consume in your daily routine.
So it's very odd when you think about it, but it was intentionally designed to make this sound very robotic.
Pure Thrive.
Pure Thrive.
No, it's taking over. The way how this is done, for those that are interested in voice technology, so there's almost a separate language. It's a speech markup language, SSML, speech synthesis markup language, because you're synthesizing what the agent is saying. And you see here in the code how this is done. So for example, we altered the pitch, slightly increased the pitch from the baseline. So it's the same voice that you listen to in the natural condition. But this voice was increased in terms of pitch. So it's a higher frequency level when the agent is talking. And also it's talking a little bit faster. So that's what you see here in the code as a change in the speech rate. But the substantive content, what they were saying, and the recommendation that they were issuing was exactly the same. And we were just interested, how do people perceive this experience, and also do they follow the recommendation that they receive? I'm just showing you here the main result for the request versus command, because again, as similar with respect to the wake word, it didn't really matter whether we took the robotic voice or if we took the natural sounding voice. The only thing that happened was, in the robotic voice, all the effects were just decreased. But the relative difference between commands and requests were always the same. And the same in the following sense. Again, people using requests, they perceive the interaction as more natural. And what we also find is that when people are using requests to interact with the interface, people perceive this as more natural, and also then, as a consequence, are more willing to follow the recommendation that you receive. And that was some initial exploration. We have a few more studies now in the consumer context. I can talk a little bit more about that later. For example, we start examining now whether people are willing to connect the device to more other interfaces. So are you willing, if you're using requests during interaction and you're done with the task, what kind of things could you envision doing with the interface? And what we find is that people are willing to explore more. They're willing to connect to, I don't know, a thermostat, or I don't know, using it to read your calendar. Versus when you're staying in the command way of using the interface, people stay fairly narrowly in that area that they used for the specific task that they were required to do in the experiment. So when you think about the contribution, or at least what we think as a short summary, what might be interesting here in this work, just for all of it here, right, in one go. So substantively, what we think is interesting is that we look at the input modality. There's a lot of work that has been published, not just in the last few years, but in human-computer interaction, on changing, for example, the specific voice of the interface, as we just saw in this very last study, where we manipulate the frequency range, for example, of the agent. What we think is interesting is what happens when you change the input modality. So what changes when you require people to talk in a very specific way to a voice interface about the experience that they have, whether they shop differently, whether they are more likely to follow a certain recommendation that you receive. And then also second, from a method perspective, what we think is interesting is that analyzing the vocal features also a new lens to understand user behavior. And it can be user behavior here in the context where it's more broadly about human-machine interaction, but also if you think more broadly about it, to leverage the type of data that we can get here from people and have a more direct assessment of the actual experience and the task. So linking these phonetic signals to the actual experience that they have during the interaction. And also for those who are more on the design side and interested in how do I need to design a specific system. Again, for those who are interested in taking, for example, a look at what AWS is doing to teach developers how to design Amazon Alexa skills, you will see very quickly there's a push toward using more commands. But we see that that has quite important downstream consequences of how people experience interaction with voice technology, the type of tasks that they could envision, and also the way how they speak, and also what they would be willing to do when it comes to more consequential, for example, as in less than shopping context. So that's about it. And yeah, I'm happy to discuss further. I'm carefully monitoring the chats. The only thing that I see is my very first comment here, intent matching. So yeah, excited to take your questions. Thank you.